Hello there, everyone. Tim here. Welcome back to another episode of ITIYL. As always, I cannot wait to speak to you all. And everyone, I am still in one piece. I made it. I said something last week that nearly had me crucified. And I'll tell you what, if you want to start an argument, if you want to potentially get murdered, say something bad about Tupac. Say something bad about Tupac. Say how anything negative that can be perceived as negative about Tupac. So just to show you what I mean, last week I talked about, Stephen Hawking and Craig Mack, who passed away, and started to talk about how death can immortalize someone's accomplishments, and in some cases really propel you higher or make you seem more talented than maybe you would have been otherwise. If someone is living and we say how they're not currently that good, it's not a huge deal, but you'll never really hear anyone speak ill of the dead, right? Take any major recording artist, regardless of genre, who has passed away. If their work wasn't that great, but they produced some cool stuff or some noteworthy stuff, you'll hear only the people talk about the noteworthy stuff because they don't want to be, it's taboo to say anything bad about anyone who, quote unquote, is a legend, in which case death may have gave them that legendary status. Death may have put them in that upper echelon. So I spoke specifically about Tupac's death, and I also mentioned other rappers as well, like Big L. I didn't mention Big Pun, but Big Pun, and of course Biggie. And I mentioned how these rappers were good for the most part. Take Tupac and Biggie specifically. These two rappers were beyond good. They were great. They were amazing. I've always gravitated more towards Biggie because he is, in my opinion, even to this day, one of the most diverse and one of the most versatile artists who have ever touched a microphone. His storytelling ability, his capability in how he would craft a story, how he would craft a rap, whether it be something goofy like in the song Dead Wrong, or whether it be something serious. He was able to, even if it was a song like Warning, he was able to craft a story and you felt like you were listening to someone telling a story. It's very intricate, and you got to give Big Papa some props there. Biggie, maybe revolutionary is too heavy of a word, but he was very unique in that regard, the way he could just craft and mold the story. I found that to be really, really cool, really, really awesome. I never got that from Pac. Now, I just want to, I'm going to touch on what I said. I'm going to ask you guys, was the reaction justified from some of you? And then we're just going to move on because I want to make it to another episode. I don't want to die. And that's the fastest way to death. Say something bad about Tupac, and then you'll find yourself damn near murdered, maybe crucified even. So the context in which I'm speaking about, like I mentioned earlier, I was talking about does death propel you to make you seem like you're better than you really are? So I'm an 80s baby. I was born late 80s. So something else that I mentioned last week was, unless you were born like the fourth year on back. So for example, if you were born 84 on back, 94 on back, 74 on back, you really can't remember much that happened within that decade. Of course, if you're born 81, 82, 83, by the time 90 rolls around, you're 7. You had at least, 3-4 good years where you can formulate some memories and some experiences. And then by the time the next decade comes around, you're already starting to discover certain things about you, especially if you were born in 80, 81, 82 even, you're almost 10 years old going into the new decade. So when Tupac comes out, when Biggie comes out, when Nas comes out, and Jay-Z comes out with these records, you're able to really digest them on a level that somebody like me wouldn't have been able to. I really didn't start discovering the effect that music had on me as a person and just as my personality until the 2000s, because again, that's when I was, a teenager, and I was able to really digest what I was hearing. So that being said, there's certain artists I didn't live through. I didn't live through Biggie. I didn't live through Nas. I didn't live through LL Cool J. I didn't live through Pac. I had to go back. I had to backtrack and listen to these guys, and in some cases, girls. So um, there's a certain level, there's a certain piece of the puzzle that you're going to be missing. You get the full experience when you live through something. Take a tragedy like 9/11. If you lived through that, if you've experienced that, whether you had someone involved directly that was directly with that incident, or you watched it from a distance. I remember to this day exactly where I was during 9/11, and I can tell you exactly what I was doing. I can tell you almost that whole day. I can't remember what I did yesterday front to back, but I could tell you exactly what I was doing that day. Not a lot of people growing up now who they didn't experience that. Kids now in school, they didn't experience that. They're learning about it, and I don't even know what they're learning about in history class, but just for the sake of the argument, they're learning about that in history class. They didn't live through that. We didn't live through the Revolutionary War. We didn't live through the Civil War. We didn't live through the Civil Rights, movement. So there's a lot of things that we can look back on and try to read as much as we can about, watch documentaries and things like that. But there's a certain element that will always be missing because we won't live through that. And I think that's where certain people who scoffed at the idea that I said Tupac was overrated, I think that's they have a unique benefit and a disadvantage at the same time in living through it. With music is unique because unlike history, music you can go back and listen to. I can listen to an album that came out 2 years ago. I can listen to an album that came out 20 years ago. And I can still tell you what that music means to me eternally. Even now, in my late 20s, I can listen to any type of music, any genre, and tell you what I think about it. And I can tell you certain things that matter to me now that didn't matter to me as a teenager, like production value, the way the beat was crafted, certain ad libs, the sample that was, the song that was sampled that was put into the beat. There are things that matter to me now that didn't matter to me back then. So I think there's a unique advantage in going back and listening to music that came out 10, 15, 20 years ago, and you can go, okay, wow, I can see the message that Tupac meant here. Oh, I can appreciate the lyrical prowess that Biggie had. I can appreciate Illmatic a little bit more than I did when I was hearing songs on the radio. Because one will argue you don't really hear the best songs on the radio anyway. So I think the people who were coming at me in a sense of like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I even had one person who said I was trolling. They thought I was just, getting on the internet and just saying, oh, Tupac was overrated just to get, just for clickbait. And I understand, the angle they were coming from, especially if you don't know that I was genuine in my opinion. I can see how you thought that, like, how anybody could think, like, oh, he's clearly just trying to get clicks and downloads for his show. But I meant that genuinely. But for someone who lived through that, they have an advantage in this that I will never have, in the sense that they grew up during the music. I had my uncle tell me, you didn't grow up during that time, so you don't know what Tupac meant to the culture. And I totally agree. I have no idea. Not only do I not know what Tupac meant to the culture, I don't even know what the culture was. I was too young to comprehend it. So I totally understand where they're coming from, but here's the disadvantage that they have. Last week we also talked about looking through rose-colored glasses at something that really wasn't that great, but you make it great because you associate it with how you felt at the moment. Think about songs that came out during our high school prom. Think about songs that came out during our soft op. Think about songs that came out during our first kiss. During that one summer you got into that trouble with that one friend. During that time you hookied school, and you stayed at home to watch the box all day, and you saw some videos, the same videos that would loop on the box, the Green Day, the Linkin Park, the, My Chemical Romance, the Tupac. you know, the Pink, you know, whatever videos were on at the time. When you hear that song, that memory comes right to the forefront of your mind. So you're going to romanticize when looking back on certain things. You're going to romanticize that experience. You're going to say, "Oh, this was all great. Tupac was amazing," because it's associated with this memory. I think they have a unique advantage in the sense that they can tell me what was going on at the time. They can tell me what Tupac meant to the culture. They can tell me how an album impacted a community and politics in general, the whole rap game, and how it revolutionized the way rap is viewed in the media. But at the same time, I personally feel like many people who lived through the Tupac era can't sit down and objectively say on the scale of 1 to 10 how good he was. Objectively, because they're romanticizing what they've been through. I'm not taking anything away from Tupac. I think Tupac was a great artist. I think Tupac is very good, and I definitely believe Tupac is top 10 greatest rappers of all time. But to sit here and say that he's the GOAT, to sit here and say that Tupac is the greatest rapper of all time, I think it's just absurd to me. And that's what makes him overrated in my opinion. So calling him good, calling him great, looking at his numbers, looking at his lyrics, looking at his songs, his features, his music as an artist, I won't say he's overrated in that regard. My sole point is calling him number one of all time, calling him the best of all time is what makes him overrated. If he wasn't considered the best of all time in many circles, I wouldn't even have the thought that he was overrated. I think he would be right where he is. I was talking to my buddy Ryan about what death does to an artist, and he made a really good point about how, especially if you're in your prime and you're doing really, really well, you're the buzz, you know, you're the bee's knees at the moment. If you pass away, you're stuck at that spot. You will never decline. Take somebody like, I don't know, Jay-Z. When Kingdom Come came, when Kingdom, his album right after the Black Album, it's tough to top the Black Album. You know, I think, you know, the Blueprint and the Black Album are 1A and 1B on his two best albums that he's ever come out with. So when you follow the Black Album with Kingdom Come, one could arguably say that that was a decline. American Gangster was technically an album, technically a soundtrack. It could go either way. I like that album, but definitely not Jay-Z's best work. So Magna Carta, Holy Grail, in my opinion, is overrated. So we got to see Jay-Z's rise and fall in some areas. You definitely got to see Jay-Z's peak. Definitely got to see some of Jay-Z's valleys. And you can actually objectively say, okay, this was good and this was bad, right? So you can take a look at, you know, Jay-Z and see where he has some moments that weren't too hot. Can't really look at Biggie or Pac and say that. You can't really say, oh, Pac wasn't doing too well this time or Biggie wasn't doing too well this time. They were almost at it like a constant high. They did not have a chance to decline. So when you take an artist who's good, I take that back. When you take an artist who's great, they have not had a chance to decline, and they pass away, they're going to be entrenched in whatever that spot was. You take Jay-Z, who may at one point, 1 year, maybe even a couple years, have been the number one, and then he comes out with an album like Kingdom Come, he could drop down to your number 5, your number 6, your number 8. And then you go, okay, objectively, I can say that Jay-Z was number 1 in this year and dropped afterwards. Can't say that about Biggie. You can't say that about Tupac. They were number 1 and number 2. In some cases, 1A and 1B. And when they died, they stayed there. And that can be really difficult to argue against. So for all the people out there who damn near had my head on a stick, I'm not saying Tupac was bad. I'm not trolling. I'm just saying that calling him the greatest of all time it's a bit of a stretch. I will say that I was a bit disappointed too because nobody really could objectively tell me why he would be why he's lauded so much. Everyone just told me how wrong I was, but no one could tell me I even had one friend. I'm like, well, help me understand. My one friend who said I was trolling. I was like, well, help me understand. And no comeback there. So, that was last week's topic, but still, it's an ongoing topic. It's a living, breathing, organic topic. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'll talk if you'll listen at hotmail.com or ITIYL_ITIYL on Twitter, and just give me your thoughts. Let me know, where your head is, and hopefully somebody can give me a legitimate argument as why Tupac is better. No, instead of just telling me I'm crazy. That was the general response. I'm crazy. So feel free to reach out to the emails, ladies and gentlemen. I would really appreciate it. Reach out to the email like Anthony did. Anthony is a listener to the show and he gives some great feedback. He has his own, I mentioned Anthony before, he has his own YouTube channel and Facebook page called The Nerd Coalition. So shout out to Anthony and everyone else on the page. And I really like Anthony. He supports the show, and he shot an email to the show on a topic that we spoke about in the past, and he gave me permission. Thank you, Anthony. And for the record, everybody, the conversations that we have face to face, the conversations that you email into me, I'll keep your name out of it unless you want me to use it, and I'll be upfront. I'll tell you like, hey, can I use your name? And eventually, just a hint at a little surprise coming. Maybe I won't have to read these anymore, but I'll leave that kind of just floating out there, and have you guys wonder what I mean by that. But I have a really cool surprise coming in the future. But without further ado, here's Anthony's email. And again, some of this may be dated because he's talking about a previous topic that we covered on a previous episode. And I didn't get a chance to get to this email last week. But Anthony goes, Dear Tim, awesome episode this week. Also, I'm glad you extended this episode. I really appreciate the shout out as well. Thank you. No problem, Anthony. And you, among others, some people I spoke to face to face, like my friend Vanessa, for example, like you, Anthony, have mentioned like, hey, the show needs to be longer. Tim, what are you doing? Show needs to be longer. And I'm glad that it is because, I can give a brief recap on last week and tell you all how I almost died for saying something negative about Tupac. And we can still have a significant amount of time left in the show to talk about new topics and even to read some feedback or some emails, good or bad or indifferent, like Anthony hears. So Anthony continues by saying, this week's topic started a conversation between my girlfriend and I about gender roles. Remember, everyone, we spoke about gender roles and if they're relevant, do they exist? Do you believe in them? I believe in gender roles. I don't think it matters who makes more money or who proposes to who, but I do feel that to raise a boy to be a man, there needs to be a man in that child's life. Same with females. I don't feel like a man should teach his daughter about the first period. It should come from a woman. My girlfriend says she disagrees. She pointed out about how I was raised. Growing up, I never had a father figure until I was around 12 when my stepdad came. I wasn't taught the traditional male work such as cutting grass, fixing cars, all that jazz. I don't have a problem with that because I can hire anyone to do that. But more like the sex talk, how to be a provider and protector of my family. Most of those things I learned was from shows like Family Matters and Fresh Prince, where the father is active in the lives of the children. Part of me feels like I'm missing qualities on becoming a great father or husband, but learning it from the TV, I learned what to do and what I shouldn't do. So that was Anthony's email, and I just want to touch on a few points there because he makes some good points. First and foremost, whether you believe in gender roles or not, even if you have an opinion on gender roles and if they should exist, if they shouldn't exist, you can at least agree that a man cannot teach a woman or a girl how to become a lady. A woman cannot teach a man to become a man. And the number one argument, and I'm going to stop you before you even have that thought. I know a lot of women out there are going to disagree because, especially in certain communities, there are a lot of women who are single parents. And I'm not taking anything away from the mothers who have done a fantastic job. Or I wouldn't even dare say that they're handicapped or at a disadvantage. I'll leave that up to you all to have that debate. What I will say, however, is no matter how convinced you are that your mother did a good job raising you, if you were raised in a single parent home, I was raised in a single parent home by my mother. No matter how much you argue how good of a job she did, and I'm sure in some cases she did an amazing job, a woman can never replace a man. Even if the message is the same, even if a woman teaches her son how to hold his hands in a fight, how to be a protector for his family, how to shave, certain techniques. Mother could be a mechanic. Certain roles, certain jobs aren't specific to certain genders. I know plenty of female mechanics, and the mother could be a mechanic and could teach the son how to fix cars. But the message is received differently when it comes from the same gender. The message that a young lady gets from her father about her period will be received differently if it comes from her mother or another. And Anthony points out a really good point here, that it doesn't necessarily have to be a biological mother or biological father. It could be a mother figure or a father figure. And that's really important. I had a lot of great father figures growing up. And even my older brother now, I would say, is a father figure to me in a sense. He teaches me things about finance. He gives me advice on homes and cars. He gave me, heck, when I first moved into my current place, my credit was shot. He gave me some really great advice on how to get a secure credit card. And you figure, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there looking, oh, that's something you should know. Well, you don't know until you don't. You don't know until you know. You don't know what you don't know. And he's been a father figure to me in that regard. So it doesn't necessarily have to be biological, but I think it's really important to have somebody in your life on that can teach you things and know how to communicate. No matter how awesome a mother is at raising her son, a mother was never a boy. A mother was never a teenage boy who had to deal with talking to the popular girl in third period. A mother never had to deal with that. So although a mother can give advice on to a degree on relations, there's still an angle. There's still a piece of the pie missing. So thank you so much, Anthony, for that, for the email and reaching out. I really appreciate the feedback, and I encourage all of you to reach out just like Anthony did. I'll share you guys' thoughts. I'll share you guys' opinions, even if it's contrary to what I personally believe or feel, and put it out there and for the audience to give me their thoughts and feedback on your opinion. So feel free, just like Anthony did, email I'll talk if you'll listen at hotmail.com or on Twitter at ITIYL underscore ITIYL. I had one listener said that she would even make a Twitter just so she can tweet at the show, which is pretty cool, and that put a huge smile on my face. But Anthony calls out, so he says his girlfriend and him got into a disagreement about the topic, and it just goes to show you how important opinions are when it comes to a relationship. And a lot of these opinions are formulated at the very, very onset when it comes to like dating, at the very, very beginning. A few episodes ago, I asked a question about who should pay during the first date. I had one listener today even who told me that he feels that whoever asked the person out on the date should pay. But there were certain women who scoffed at the idea of them having to pay for the date. Now, they feel as though the man should take initiative and ask you out. And if he doesn't ask you out and pay for the first date and do things like pick you up, then he's not worth your time. I would say, why do you feel like your time is more valuable than his? And I would say that everyone's time is equally valuable. just like you want him to convince you that he's worthwhile, the other way, it should be the other way around as well. And I can go ahead and tell you that I know a lot of young ladies who made the first move and they are very, very happy with it. And it it could go a long way. I can't tell you how many guys are impressed with a young lady who makes the first move. Not necessarily overly aggressive, still let a man be a man, but at the same time, just makes the first move like, hey, let me take you out. Let me take you out to dinner. Let me sit you down. And that's really impressive, and it could definitely catch a man off guard. And I was reading a study, this article. If I find the article, I'll let you guys know. This article it said 98% of men will never approach women, ever. And I think a lot of young ladies out there are looking for a guy who falls into that 98%. But it said, those 98% of men will never approach a woman unless the circumstance is beneficial to them. And what I mean by that is, or at least what the article meant by that is, if how many of us on our daily commute sees a guy or a girl every day at the same coffee shop, on the same street, on the same train, whatever the case may be, and you smile, you nod, you maybe have small talk, but you never make the first move. And how many of us, guys and girls, are going to thinking like, oh, why won't they ask me out? Why won't they make the first move? Well, it's because they're waiting for the initial okay. They're waiting for, because a lot of things are ambiguous. As direct as we think we're being, like, oh, I play with my hair all the time when I'm around them. Oh, I told her I like her dress and I like her style. And in our head, we basically have a sign on our forehead that says I like you. But you'd be surprised how ambiguous a lot of that is. And you'd be surprised how confused that leaves a lot of people, a lot of potential boyfriend or girlfriends. So there's a lot of apprehension there. And 98% of men will never approach a woman because they genuinely feel that way. And I think that's pretty powerful. And it really got me to thinking about the type of things you can discover during dating once you do get past that hump. And then I got to thinking about what's considered too long for dating, right? Like, some people say X amount of dates, some people say X amount of time, and it could go either way. You could go on 3 dates in the course of 3 weeks. Is 3 weeks enough time to really make the move and say, hey, we're going steady? We're exclusive now. Is 3 weeks enough time to put a title on somebody? Some people, the quantity where they're like, we need to go X number of dates. Well, what if you go on 4 dates in 6 months? Now it's been half a year and you've only been on 4 dates, but you've been in constant communication with this person, whether it be group outings, group events, texting, talking on the phone, gaming online with each other, visiting the same gym. You've seen each other for half a year, but you've only been on 4 dates just due to your schedule. Is that enough time to apply titles to one another? Is that enough time to remain exclusive? And then you have the argument of, at what point do I tell them what? How long do we need to be dating before I tell them that I'm having sex with other people? Before I tell them that I'm looking for an open relationship? Before I tell them that, hey, I don't believe in having sex until marriage? Before I tell them, like, hey, I live at home with my parents? Before I tell them, like, hey, I don't have a car, I'm in school full time? And here's a really, really good, this is probably the one that occupied my mind the most. And how soon before you tell them you have kids? How soon before you tell them, hey, I have 1, 2, 3 kids? I have kids by, two different women. I have kids by 2 different men. I have kids who don't live in the same state as I do. There's so many variations there. And I think that's definitely something to consider. I think the obvious thing, I'm going to try to attack this from an angle where hopefully it's a unique perspective that you haven't heard before. But I think it's obvious how difficult it is for women, especially who have kids, to date, because you don't want to bring any old body around your kids. Even if you like the person, and even if the person has a good head on their shoulders, they're squared away to the nines, and they're in school, they're working towards a degree, they have a full-time job, they have good benefits, they set up their 401k, they may have their own house, their own apartment, they may be taking care of their parents, so they have a good head on their shoulders because they care about family, the whole nine. They may be well traveled, they may be great at networking, and you're like, this is a great person, but you don't want, speaking from experience as a child who went through this, you really don't want constant men. And just speaking from like a woman's from what I've heard from a woman's perspective, you don't really want different men in a child's life, even if the man has his head on his shoulders, because what will happen is the children will see that. The children will get attached to that. They'll start calling this person, Mr. Whomever, and expect you to, subconsciously anyway, you're replacing something that they're lacking. And then let's just say something doesn't work out between you and the mother and you're gone. Now it's like, okay, well, now who's this other guy? Or hey, where did, Mr. James go? And it it's like it's a unique challenge. But I think a thing that's often overlooked because it's a taboo topic. And this might be almost as bad as talking bad about Tupac. So I hope I survive until next week. If you guys don't hear from me next week, you know what happened. But I think the topic that over the unpopular opinion and the perspective that oftentimes gets overlooked is what the person who doesn't have the kid, the person who's dating the person with the kids, what they have to go through. Because that's a unique challenge as well. Take a woman, take a man who's dating someone who has kids. There's certain things that you expect that, you don't have kids. There's certain obligations and responsibilities that you don't feel restricted or limited by, that you now have to you have to open your mind up to a whole new world of liberties. You might want to go over this person's house if this person lives alone. Well, obviously with their kids, but if this person has their own place, you may want to go over there at 10, 11 o'clock at night. They may want you to come over, but you can't because the kids are asleep. The kids are in bed. You can't just be walking in at 2 a.m. Now, some people do that. Hey, the kids are already asleep. It's okay for you to come over. But some people have a respect for the situation, the environment, and they're like, look, the kids, they shut it down. They shut it down at 8 o'clock. They shut it down at 9 o'clock. I don't want any ruckus in the house to prevent their sleep because it's a hassle getting them out the house in the morning. So, I don't want anything to disrupt the harmony of their bedtime. It's already a pain in the butt getting them to bed in the first place, right? So, you want, especially if you got boys. Boys are all over the place, but you don't want anything to disrupt that harmony. Or, maybe you want to be spontaneous. There are a lot of women out there. There are a lot of men out there who like the spontaneous. They like the guy or the girl to be spontaneous. Like, hey, let's go to New York for lunch. Hey, let's go to a movie. I know it wasn't planned, but hey, let's go to a movie. Hey, there's a festival happening in the next town over. Let's go. Hey, there's a flea market happening in, this state over here. Let's go. And you like that spontaneous, action, that spontaneous behavior. But you can't do that when you have kids. You can't do that. You have to consider not just the person's life, but the kid's life. When do they get out of school? When do they come back from their grandparents? Are they hanging out with you this holiday? Are they hanging out with their other parent this holiday? Things like that. And I think the reason no one wants to say that the person without the kids has it hard too is because it sounds like it's inconsiderate. But it's not just the person with the kids, it's the person without the kids who can struggle. Because you might genuinely want certain liberties. You might say, hey, I got a bottle of wine. Why don't you come over? Oh, I can't. The kids will be here by themselves. And then it's kind of like a turnoff. And then you become like, you don't want to come off as like the bad guy or the bad girl. You know, um, my brother, his sister, so not my sister, different fathers. So my brother, his sister, was dating somebody and ended up calling it quits because she wanted him to come over and he couldn't because he had the kids. It would be times where she'd be like, "Hey, why don't you, I got a bottle of wine, come on over." Or, "Hey, this new series, Jessica Jones season 2 just came out on Netflix. Why don't you come over and we can start binge watching?" "Oh, I can't because of the kids." And then you come off as like the bad girl or the bad guy because you're not considering the kids because you've never been put in a situation where you had to do that before. So I think it's hard for both parties. I think it's absolutely positively hard for um for the parent because you've been with the children's father or mother for such a long period of time potentially, whether it be during the child's childhood, whether it be during the teenage years, whatever the case may be, and now you are trying to invite this new person into that child's life, and no matter how much you try to keep them separate, you can't. It's an eventuality. That person is going to meet your children is going to meet that person eventually is going to come into your home. You may eventually bring, what if the person you're dating has kids? That's another potential thing too. So now you're eventually going to have to bring that person. So dating, when you have kids, it's very, very hard to date. But I think we also should be considerate of how difficult it is when you're the person without the kids and you're dating someone with kids. That could be a unique situation because if you say something, how many of us have had the thought of when we heard somebody broke up with somebody because they had kids, the first thought you think is like, oh, that's messed up. Well, is it I think it's very mature for somebody to sit here and say, I'm not ready for that responsibility. I'm not selfless enough to put my life on the back burner and raise kids. And then you also have the thought on the back of your mind of, you know, these aren't my kids. Can I ever really truly be their mother? Can I ever really truly be their father? You'll have that thought in the back of your head. And it's like taboo. Can you imagine like how crazy someone would get, like someone would be crucified and if they went and said, "Oh, I didn't date this person because they had kids. I just wasn't ready for that." I feel like it's a little bit more pressure on men than it is women. I think like if a woman said like, "Oh, he had kids and there was a lot going on with that, so I didn't want to date him." I think she gets a bit more of a pass. And it's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's normal." But if a guy is like, "Oh, I don't want to date her because she has kids," or, "Hey, it was nice dating her, but it started to get a little bit restrictive or a little bit serious with the kids, so I had to cut it off." I think he doesn't get as much of a pass as the woman would. But definitely something to consider. It's really, really tough. There are a lot of things that are tough when dating. I think another topic you have to consider is age. It's an age gap. I remember at one point having a crush on a young lady who worked at a store close by near my store. I used to work in a video game retailer, and I ran the store. And on break or whenever the store needed supplies, I would go to the neighboring stores. And there was a young lady there who worked there, who you couldn't tell how old or young she was, but she's incredibly young. And as soon as I found out how young she was, it was like a huge turn off to me because I started playing in my head the things that I would have to deal with. I don't want to date a, you know what I mean? Like I don't want to raise my girlfriend, raise the person that I'm dating. And I think a lot of women feel that way too. There was a study that went out that said women are more likely to date an older man because they mature faster than men do. So they view the older man as the embodiment of stability, and he has his head on his shoulders, and he has already gotten past certain phases that the woman feels like she's too old or mature for. And I read that in the same study it says men are more likely to date younger women because they like to be viewed as the leader. Like, how the male ego works. And generally speaking, of course, obviously, this doesn't cover every man on the face of the planet. But generally speaking, men like to feel like, they're the leader, they're the patriarch, they are the dominant one, and they feel like they can be more of a leader if the woman is younger, because there's certain things that the man can teach the woman that the woman may not have gone through because she's younger. Now, again, this was all based on the study, so you got to take that for what it is. But I find it interesting that regardless of the reason, regardless of why women want to date older men, and regardless of why men want to date younger women, I think regardless of the reason, the one constant fact is that they want to do it. There's a point in time in our life where we look at somebody and people always say, "Oh, you want something you can't have," and that may be true, but I think a lot of it is just like you think it's not likely. I remember having this huge crush, huge crush on this woman that is significantly older than I am. She's not significantly, she's 9 years older than me. And there's certain things that you got to consider, like, oh, it's cute, it's adorable to have this crush on this person, and you can flirt with this person, but there's no way that it would really work out, because there are going to be certain things that a woman who's 9 years older than you are is going to view as immature, and there are going to be certain things that you don't see an issue with. So here's an example. I'm an avid gamer. I'm a huge gamer. Feel free to email me about games. I'll talk your brains out. I love video games. I've been playing video games since I can remember. I have Xbox. I have PlayStation, and I'm talking more than one generation too. Like I have PS2, I have PS3, I have PS4, I have Xbox 360, Xbox One. Huge gamer. I love games. And I view that as recreation. I view that as a hobby. I view that as a de-stressor. When I have a rough day, when I have a lot on my mind, some people may read books. Some people may go on walks. Some people may go on drives. Some people may listen to music. Me personally, I play games. And gaming now is definitely viewed differently within the culture than it was even 5, 10 years ago. However, to most older people, man or woman, it's viewed as this immature thing. And I think a lot of people within my age group don't necessarily view gaming as immature, is because we grew up with it. We experienced the boom of the video game category. If you take a look at somebody who grew up in the 70s and 80s, they had very limited access to what they were playing. Like even in like the 80s, early 90s, you had Sega, you had Nintendo. That was it. Earlier you had, of course you had, ColecoVision and Television, TurboGrafx, Neo Geo, Atari. You had those things, of course, but the two mainstream systems, the two mainstream home consoles were Nintendo or Sega. Whether it be Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, but those were the two brands. So you had very limited access to things that are out. If you look now, there are several systems out, from handheld to home consoles. Even your mobile device now can essentially be considered a video game system in some categories, especially when you look at things like Pokemon Go and how revolutionary that is. There are a lot of older people who didn't necessarily experience the boom of video game. We want to talk about living through something. Didn't experience the boom of video games, so they have a different view on it, and they view it as immature. So talk about being realistic. I knew, like, hey, look, I had this crush on this woman who's almost 10 years my senior, and she's very attractive, but there's certain things that I know there would be certain obstacles where, like, she would view like, hey, you play games as immature, and that'll oftentimes be a huge obstacle, a huge hurdle for someone who feels like, I can't be myself around this person. So that got me to thinking, like, what is the limit to how old or how young you're willing to go? Because even think about music. Think about dating somebody 10 years your senior, and you're listening to some music, and the person's just like, oh, you listen to that stuff? That's not really music. This is music. And then you get into that debate. Or, oh, you play games? Oh, that's just so immature. Oh, you watch that type of show? You're into that? What are you going to go see superhero movies for? That's so immature. There are a lot of people, there's a lot of obstacles that you may have to overcome when you date outside of your age. So I would really like to hear maybe someone who is in a relationship with someone where the person that they're with is, and I'm not talking like 3, 4, 5 years their senior. I'm talking like 9, 8, 9, 10 years their senior, 11 years their senior. I remember when my mom was 42, she was dating a 54-year-old guy, and it was pretty normal. They had very similar tastes in music. They like to eat out at a lot of the same places, and it was fairly normal. They remembered a lot of the same things, and it really wasn't too weird. And of course, I'm speaking from a child's perspective, but it really wasn't too weird, from at least from what I could see and the stuff that my mom would tell me. But I would really like to hear. I mean, because then you fall into the gap. Like if the person's significantly older than you, they kind of look at you as like a kid. And then sometimes they go from boyfriend to girlfriend mode to like older brother, older sister mode. And it's like, oh geez, am I dating an authoritative figure? Like, I don't want to answer to you. What's that about? So I always found that really, really interesting. And I'm curious, everyone, what's the oldest or the youngest that you've ever dated? What's too old? What's too young? And what goes into the creepy or weird territory? When does it become weird? When does it become like, oh no, definitely not? Obviously some people dating someone, who is old enough to be their older brother or older sister is just flat out weird to them. You can imagine bringing somebody. I noticed, I remember one of my current friends, he's older, said when he was my age, he was dating someone who was in their 40s. And I asked, hey, did you ever bring this person around your mom or your dad? And he said no, because it would have been weird. Because you're bringing someone around your parents who are your parents' age. So now you got your parents judging them like, how, that's disgusting. You're dating someone that's older, young enough to be your son. And then you're bringing someone around your parents who like literally grew up with them, could have went to the same high school as them. How weird is that? I know a lot of you are probably cringing at that thought, right? Some people don't find a problem with it. Some people are like, hey, I don't care. Love has no color. Love has no age. Love has no size. We don't discriminate when it comes to race. We date outside our race. We don't discriminate in some people when it comes to weight. We don't care how fat or skinny you are. I'm willing to date you. Height, same thing. Don't care about how tall or short you are. Why does age become the exception? So I would love to hear some feedback from you guys about that. I would love to hear you all reach out and write into the show. And again, guys, it's I'll Talk If You'll Listen at hotmail.com. No apostrophes. And it's ITIYL _ ITIYL on Twitter. Reach out. Feel free. Hit me up. And let me know what you're thinking about the show. Let me know what changes you would like to see. Let me know what's working, what's not working. Let me know what you would like to see more or less of. I really would appreciate the honest feedback. And I really do enjoy I know it's really easy to say, but I really do enjoy the feedback, whether it be, some harsh feedback or whether it be some positive feedback. But at the end of the day, it's all feedback and it's all coming from a good place. I don't think I'm that popular to where I've gotten any haters yet. So I'll let you know when that all happens. You've made it when you have haters. So you know how that goes. In the meantime, everyone, again, always a pleasure talking to you all. I look forward to hearing from you. I look forward to seeing you in person. And I look forward to you all judging me on my opinion. Till the next time, remember, I'll keep talking if you'll listen. Take care, everyone.